We're going to get started. I'm excited to introduce our guest. I should say that I'm John Martins, the director of the Center for Christian Engagement here at St. Mark's College, and I want to welcome you all to Ross Lockhart's lecture, Supernatural Vancouver, Christian Witness and Mission in a Secular Age. And the Reverend Dr. Ross Lockhart is Dean of St. Andrew's Hall and Professor of Mission Studies at Vancouver School of Theology. Thank you for traveling to be with us on our beautiful campus, which is on the land of the Musqueam people, unceded, traditional, and ancestral territory of the Musqueam people. And we're thankful for their welcome so that we can live, learn, and pray on their land. I also think this evening, because it's probably on a lot of our minds, that we want to be mindful of the innocent people in Israel and Gaza at this time, who are suffering either from the horrors of terrorist violence or the repercussions in response to that violence, and so many innocent people. And so let's pray and hope and work for peace in our small way, because I think what we're going to find, and this is important for the work we do at this center, that there's going to be rise in anti-Semitism, there will be rises in Islamophobia, and in our small way, we need to counter that. And that's work that we can all do. I also want to offer some thanks and gratitude for those who have sponsored this lecture and the lecture series. We're thankful for the Cullen family, Mark and Barbara, who are here with us, for their support of the lecture series. Thank you so much. I also want to thank our donors to the Center for Christian Engagement, Andy Zox, Peter Bull, and Angus Reed, whose generosity allows this work to take place. And we are very thankful for their commitment to the life of the academic world and the work of the church in the world. Now, a great honor to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Ross A. Lockhart, who's been a friend of St. Mark's College for many, many years. He is the Dean of St. Andrew's Hall, as I mentioned, the Presbyterian Church in Canada College at the University of British Columbia. And Ross actually has 2 PhDs. Doctor. He serves, as I mentioned earlier, Professor of Mission Studies at Vancouver School of Theology, where he teaches in practical theology. He's a graduate of the University of Winnipeg. Yay. Yes, thank you. Where I also taught. And I think you might have even been a student when I was there. I taught there until 2000.
No comment.
University of Toronto, McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago, and also a graduate of Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. He's the author of a number of books: Lessons from Laodicea, Missional Leadership in a Culture of Affluence, Beyond Snakes and Shamrocks, St. Patrick's Missional Leadership Lessons for Today, co-author of Better Than Brunch, Missional Churches in Cascadia, as well as most recently, I think, Christianity and Asian Religion in Vancouver, and editor of Christian Witness in Cascadian Soil. As I mentioned, a friend of St. Mark's College, Ross has taught homiletics in the permanent diaconate program for St. Mark's for over a decade. Please welcome our friend and a wonderful scholar, Reverend Dr. Ross Lockhart.
What a kind welcome. Thank you, John, for that. And thank you, each and every one, for taking time tonight on this beautiful evening to be in this beautiful space. To hear my research, reflection on the research, and then I'm keen to hear your thoughts in the question answer that follows. It's an honor to speak tonight at St. Mark's College for the 2023 Carr Lecture. As mentioned, St. Mark's has been a place of great connection and friendship over the years. I have enjoyed teaching homiletics in the permanent diaconate program very much here and serving on the St. Mark's Senate. And appreciate the dedication of friends and colleagues such as President Jerry Turcott, Dean Linda Robitaille, and Dean Paul Allen. My thanks in particular tonight to my friend and colleague Dr. John Martins for the invitation to speak to you all as part of the latest offering of the Center for Christian Engagement that is doing really important work in our city for church and academy. And I am grateful for the warm and meaningful connections between our theological colleges here at UBC. So, my intention tonight as a missiologist is to walk you through the highlights of my 5-year research project on Christianity in Vancouver. You're just going to get a little slice tonight, and hopefully prompt some reflection and discussion along the way. What you'll hear tonight is a descriptive snapshot of Christianity in Vancouver, viewed through an analytical lens with some tentative normative outcomes. In no way, however, do I intend to speak definitively on Christianity in Vancouver. That's where your experience in the audience following in the question and answer period will be especially interesting as you engage the data I'll present and base that off your own impressions of Christianity in Vancouver. To begin, we note that Metro Vancouver is Canada's third largest city, located on the Pacific Rim of North America and recognized around the world for its natural beauty, diverse population, mild climate, for those of us who grew up in Winnipeg, thank you, Jesus, as well as its liberal secular culture. The research project was limited to the actual city of Vancouver, that's important to note, with a little over 660,000 residents set within the greater Metro Vancouver region, now of over 2.6 million according to the 2021 census. Despite being an internationally recognized city, the study of Christianity in Vancouver through formal academic research has been limited over the years. And having called Vancouver home for nearly 2 decades, this project emerges out of my lived experience in the city and curiosities raised both through the practice of Christian ministry as an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church in Canada and as the dean of our local theological college, St. Andrew's Hall. As a missiologist, I have been exploring this question of Christian witness in the region with colleagues, and some of my previous work can be seen here on the slide. May I note each of which makes an excellent Christmas stocking stuffer gift if you want to help my retirement fund. My urban ethnographic research was conversant with my dear colleague and friend Christopher James, who teaches at the University of Dubuque's Theology School. He did an intensive research project in Seattle nearby, published by Oxford Press. You can see it up there. And my research, though, has differences, significant differences from Christopher's work, including a move beyond church plants to study broader Christian initiatives such as established congregations, so-called parachurch agencies, as well as the opportunity to explore the distinctives of the Canadian context. Now, scholars who study Christianity in both the US and Canada note similarities and distinctives on both sides of the border. For example, sociologist Sam Reimer argues in his research up here, published by McGill Queen's Press, that evangelicals share a similar subculture in both countries, while Canadian evangelicals are more ironic, with a higher level of tolerance for difference and working with those of divergent theological expressions. Reimer also notes that Canadians have been largely unable to sustain national myths of any kind, much less ones that are seen as religiously significant. Issues that divide Canadians, he writes, do not tend to fall along moral or religious lines, but along ethnic and geographic ones. In addition to James's most recent work, my research took place concurrent to the excellent study by Paul Bramadat at the University of Victoria and his colleagues that you'll see up here. That's a must-read, Religion at the Edge, published in 2022 by UBC Press. That work, however, had a much broader scope than my own research, focusing on a larger region, all of Cascadia, or the Pacific Northwest, rather than just the city of Vancouver. And it was a multi-faith approach that included Christianity. Valuable insights from that research were integrated into my own study, as well as the models of Christian witness developed in James's work. Indeed, similar to James's project, my research recognizes that often standard secularization theories describe secularization as a sort of like a force of nature in the West, something that happens to religious people. Instead, believing that religious people are not passive, my work asks what strategies Christians are actively developing that interact with the broader secular culture and provide evidence of a fulsome soteriology, fosters spiritual maturity, encourages Christian witness, enacts social justice, and partners with other community organizations for the welfare of the city. These thick descriptions go beyond the study of simple conversion behavior to help understand the context of Christian communities regarding identity and mission, the cultivation of spirituality, the strength of ecumenical relations, and the impact of the Christian community's witness on the broader secular context of 21st century Vancouver. Therefore, inspired by the research of others, yet still seeing a gap, that ever so important gap for academics, in the particular expression of Christian witness in Vancouver, I set out to explore the following research question. How are Christians in Vancouver today, as a minority expression of the majority secular population, organizing their communities, shaping their beliefs, and expressing themselves in mission? That's what we'll be spending time with tonight. Recognizing that according to Statistics Canada, Christianity in Vancouver is now a minority belief system within a wider, more secular context where environmentalism is identified as a, quote, civic religion, I developed my research methodology using an urban ethnographic perspective in the field of congregational studies, with a focus on a mix of congregations and parachurch agencies from different denominations across various neighborhoods in our city. Each site was engaged using a fourfold method described later in my presentation that helped me as a researcher gain a better understanding of that Christian initiative from both the perspective of clergy and lay people. The intention behind this project was to locate this work within the wider missional church conversation in North America, of which my colleague at St. Andrew's Hall has been deeply engaged in through the Center for Missional Leadership under the guidance of our senior fellow, Dr. Daryl Guder. To prepare for the fieldwork, I examined the city of Vancouver through several lenses. None of this will be presented tonight, but just to note, I looked at a brief historical perspective of Vancouver, the impact of globalization and immigration, economic realities, secular and liberal political culture, environmental and indigenous concerns, urbanization and isolation, as well as the ecclesiastical dimension. Early stages of this research included some quantitative work, surveying Christian leaders in Vancouver, hosting a clergy retreat day at St. Andrew's Hall to engage in some initial focus group discussions and so forth. The main part of the project that I'll present tonight addressed the research question by focusing on engagement with 14 Christian initiatives within the city of Vancouver. And it may be a bit of an eye exam, but it's up there on the PowerPoint for you to have a look at. As noted on the slide, the methodology includes 2 sites in the different categories of church plants, mainline congregations, multi-site evangelical, ethnic-specific, neighborhood-focused, Catholic Orthodox, and 2 Christian parachurch agencies. The methodology of engagement with these sites included a fourfold process, and here it comes. A careful study of the initiative's online presence. That was fascinating. Deep dive on their website, their social media, podcasts, blogs, and so forth. Next, what I called a walking interview with the pastor whenever possible in the neighborhood. Now remember, a lot of this was done during the pandemic, so it depended. But in other words, I would ask the priest or the pastor or the minister, can I meet you at your church? And then take me for a walk, and I'll buy you a decent cup of coffee at your favorite local coffee shop, that kind of thing. So that was the next step. Then there was a participant observation exercise, at least one in public worship. And finally, a focus group interview with 3 to 5 lay people per initiative as identified by the clergy leader. That fourth step of the focus groups, I followed, created an interview guide, and we'll go to that next slide now. Now that really is an eye exam, so only those in the front row. But there was 8 different questions. Let me just give you an example of one. Here was one of the questions that every focus group was asked. Tell me a story about a time you discussed your Christian faith with someone in Vancouver, neighbor, coworker, family, stranger, outside your local church. What happened, and how did the person respond? So you can imagine kind of the data that generates. It was fantastic. And from this fieldwork and the coding of data, thicker descriptions of the church in Vancouver began to emerge that I summarized in the following way on the next slide. We're going to do a good kind of deep dive on these 7. Befriending a spiritual, not religious culture, affordable housing as a missional connection, discerning models of Christian witness, good news in light of troubling colonial history, the changing face of Christianity in Vancouver, scarce, sacred space, ecology, and theology. So the first one, let's have a look. Befriending a spiritual, not religious culture. Some of you may know this was public art in Vancouver. Does anyone know where it lives now? Calgary, you're welcome. We gave it to you. Yeah, exactly. So interview subjects repeatedly noted the spiritual but not religious mindset of their friends, neighbors, and coworkers that acknowledged a general nature-based spirituality but resisted a more dogmatic expression of faith. Meditation, yoga, and finding oneself in the mountains is everywhere, said one participant. Another said, people are basically agnostic without any sense of being rooted in a tradition here. Here, the research in Vancouver echoed the findings of Elaine Graham, who describes, quote, the growing number of those who identify as spiritual but not religious as an emergent new form of religious expression, marked more heterodox and personalized. Now, recent research in the region has stated the challenge more bluntly. Cascadians do not consider organized religion a necessary part of their lives, wrote one scholar. The challenge seemed to be in how best to share the gospel with those in the city who acknowledged a spiritual but not religious mindset, but who would go no further, taking what I call an affable agnostic approach to organized religion, marked primarily by indifference. Here, the research echoes that of the wonderful work of Canadian sociologist of religion from Waterloo, Sarah Wilkins Laflamme, whose own study of British Columbians revealed that the number of those identifying as atheists or secularists was actually quite small compared to the largest number of those declaring themselves spiritual with no religion, followed by other non-religion or nothing in particular and agnostic. As British Columbian scholar of religion from Victoria, Paul Bramadat, who is referenced earlier, argues, relations between the religious, spiritual, and irreligious populations in the region strike me as remarkably congenial. There is a strong you do you orientation in the region. Now, the very language of you do you kept popping up throughout the focus group interviews in Vancouver, both as statement of fact as well as frustration about not being able to help Vancouverites who self-identify with a spiritual but not religious worldview take any further steps towards faith in Jesus. Participants in the Vancouver Research Project expressed similar disappointment and frustration that engagement with their non-Christian neighbors so rarely led to deeper conversations, let alone examples of conversion. Now, despite these challenges of living and sharing the gospel as a sent community of Christians in Vancouver, the research offered evidence of effective engagement with the broader, more secular urban context. As one focus group member said, our mission is to include everyone and spread God's love, and we are all the same as human beings. Wherever we are in the city, whatever we're doing for work or play, we're involved in loving the other just as we love God. Specifically, the research demonstrated that Christians in Vancouver articulate a great emphasis upon building relationships with their non-Christian neighbors in order to attempt to share and show the gospel. One focus group participant said, the most helpful thing in the end is forming relationships with deep care and trust. You don't come into people's lives with an agenda, you come with love. In other words, evangelistic witness without a pre-existing friendship or relationship did not prove effective for many. Now, while evangelistic street outreach does happen in Vancouver, those interviewed for the project consistently named the priority of building relationships with family, friends, co-workers, and neighbors as a place for mutual sharing of values and beliefs. The research revealed that this kind of relationship building was not programmatic, but rather encouraged theologically in the teaching of the local churches and left to happen organically. Now, whether it actually happens in practice or not is a question. One focus group participant said, it helps when Christians are genuinely excited about the good news and share it organically through their life and relationships rather than a pre-packaged program. This emphasis upon relationship is being recognized more widely in the Canadian missional church discussion. As missiologist Lee Beach at McMaster University in Ontario notes, missional relationships call us to be listeners and caregivers in a way that embodies with care the compassion of God himself. It asks us to, like Jesus, Be willing to be found with the sinners and the unlovely, so that the relational priorities of God are found in our lives too. Furthermore, this kind of relational evangelism means that the church itself will function as a place that demonstrates the power of Christ to transform human relationships. In Alberta, theologian Gordon Smith, well known and loved by us here on the UBC campus now at Ambrose University, notes, "We cannot in the end be spiritual without being religious. Authentic spirituality needs the sustaining power of a community with a shared faith, conviction, orientation, and accountability. Religious belief is inherently communal." Second finding, affordable housing as missional connection. The bottom one is a Cohere housing project, worth Googling, and it's in East Vancouver. It doesn't take long to be in conversation with Vancouverites, even tonight at dinner, before the topic of real estate and affordable housing comes up. Housing is a major social issue affecting the quality of life for residents here, with Vancouver often ranked the second most expensive city in the world. Don't you find when we're knocked down from that, you're disappointed a little bit too? It's a terrible thing. We should be excited, but I'm always a little disappointed. In 2023, the average price of a detached home in Vancouver is around $1.8 million. Throughout this research into Christianity in Vancouver, the question of affordable housing was named as a challenge again and again, as well as an opportunity for mission. The connection of affordable housing to hospitality while serving the needs of the city and engaging the neighbors in the neighborhood became clearer in the walking conversations with pastoral leaders and the 14 focus groups. Participants specifically named nonprofit organizations in Vancouver with whom they supported, addressing the issue of affordable housing: More Than a Roof, Kinbrace, Baptist Housing Ministries, Youth Unlimited, and. Others named the ways in which they were engaging in advocacy with politicians, the media, and property developers in order to advocate for more affordable housing in our city. One focus group participant said, "Affordable housing is not just about hospitality for the poor or at-risk street population. Hospitality goes further because Vancouver is so lonely and expensive, the church needs to build community where it is lacking." This comment echoes the Vancouver Foundation's extensive research into loneliness in the city. Often affordable housing is seen from a Christian perspective as care for the poor. However, an important dimension of the affordable housing debate in Vancouver is that it is difficult to afford housing in this city, even for those with financial means. For example, a recent survey of the broader Cascadian region echoes this project's focus on affordable housing. As University of Victoria scholar Paul Bramadat notes, the cost of living in the region now has become one of the galvanizing concerns animating younger urban residents. He writes, "These worries are by far most acute in Vancouver and Seattle, where for a variety of reasons it is difficult for many young people, even educated professionals, to imagine ever owning a home." To that end, the United Church of Canada has proposed a partnership with the British Columbia government to build 400 new affordable rental homes for individuals, families, and seniors at 4 church-owned properties, 3 of them in Greater Vancouver, 1 on Vancouver Island. But wait for it, for people with average incomes between $50,000 and $100,000. That someone earning $100,000 a year will qualify for affordable housing illustrates Bramadat's point that there is a certain crisis in housing in the region, extending through different parts of society. From advocacy for more affordable housing, creative use of church assets for housing development, to the heavy emphasis on hospitality and friendship in Christian community, the research identified a variety of ways in which this pressing issue is being seen as a missional opportunity. This is not without challenge, however. As Jonathan Bird, who many of us know in the room, then at that time at Union Gospel Mission, noted at an affordable housing conference we hosted at St. Andrew's Hall, there is only, according to his estimation, a little over 200 church buildings left in the city of Vancouver, many of which are located on small lots in residential areas that make their land unsuitable for such redevelopment. Nevertheless, the desire to provide both affordable housing as a missional engagement with the city and the intention to provide hospitality and build deeper relationships with isolated and lonely neighbors came through very clearly in the data. Acting as a countercultural witness, participants suggested that the church has something to offer the wider culture through its gospel values that was not easily identifiable elsewhere in Vancouver. And this emphasis from the data of Vancouver Christians engaging the issue of affordable housing as missional action raises the question of where else across Canada might this also be taking place. Through the coding, the next piece of data that came up was discerning models of Christian witness. As mentioned earlier, the Vancouver research began in the wake of significant work completed by Christopher James in church planting in post-Christian soil. That was his PhD work under Brian Stone at Boston University. And that took place in Seattle. Now, he only focused on church plants, but he developed 4 models of new Christian communities: Great Commission teams, Household of the Spirit, New Community, and Neighborhood Incarnational. James's research produced heuristic models of new churches and characteristics of their engagement with the wider city. And while James focused on particular kinds of communities present in these new churches, this research has expanded the scope to include a wider sample now of mainline Protestant, neighborhood-focused, large multi-site campuses, ethnically specific churches, and so forth in my own research. Now, similar to James's findings, the Vancouver data offered clear evidence of a strong emphasis upon community and belonging, with many of the initiatives studied reflecting the characteristics of the neighborhood incarnational model. As one focus group participant said, "What helps is our deep Christian community in the city that has a loneliness epidemic. People see what we have and they think, hey, I need that too." Now, some of the sites visited reflected a shared emphasis upon welcome, hospitality, and community, but leaned more towards what Christopher James calls the new community model, with their particular emphasis upon LGBTQI inclusion. As one participant said, "We're known and trusted in the community. Being known in the community as LGBTI inclusive church helps in conversations with others, since they often presume that most Christians are judgmental towards those of different sexual orientations." While the data in this Vancouver research suggests the neighborhood incarnational and, to a lesser extent, the new community model are present in the city, it certainly does not deny the presence or impact of James's other models, including Household of the Spirit, and especially the Great Commission team, with some evidence present in my sample of that as well. And despite the wider field of study in the Vancouver research beyond simply church plants, the Christian initiatives displayed a common appreciation for organizing themselves to be a place of welcome and hospitality, attentive either to a particular ethnic group, Armenian Orthodox, Chinese Presbyterian, a neighborhood, Kitsilano, Marpole, or the wider city, Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries, or your own Holy Rosary Cathedral that very much saw itself as a ministry for the whole city. Here, the Vancouver data echoes other recent research in the region, including Dustin Bennick's examination of the Parish Collective in Seattle and the Office of Church Engagement in Spokane, Washington. We'll move to the next slide and the next piece of data that came up. Good news in light of troubling colonial history. If we can advance one slide, that would be great. While Christians seek to share the gospel with their neighbors in Vancouver, the research identified the difficulty of communicating the good news of Christianity in light of the bad news of colonial mission history, increasingly profiled in the Canadian media. Pastors and lay people interviewed in this project consistently named the troubled history of Canadian churches and Indigenous peoples as a stumbling block for sharing the gospel with Vancouverites. As one participant said, "When I try to share my faith, I usually start off with something light, like, 'Oh, this weekend I'm going to church. Do you go to church?' And people respond, 'No, I hate church.' The person paused and said, 'How do I respond to that?' This person then went on to name the negative depiction of Christianity in the media, especially regarding residential schools and treatment of Indigenous peoples, and how that hinders Christian witness. It is now, of course, well known in Canadian society that mainline churches, in partnership with the Canadian government throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, forcibly removed Indigenous children from their homes and sought to westernize them at the cost of their own culture. In addition, these church-run, government-funded programs subjected many Indigenous children to physical and sexual abuse, with new revelations of the atrocities continuing to surface. including throughout the time of the research that I was engaged in with the discovery of the children's graves in Kamloops. In 2008, just 12 years after the last residential school in Canada closed, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada released its report with calls to action for Canadians, including the churches. Canadian theologian Joanne Pepper notes that as the findings of the report produced by the TRC were made openly available, socially concerned persons arose as one to query whether Christian missionaries bore culpability for the destabilizing influences of Indigenous cultures. Disquieted citizens wanted to know, to what degree has Christianity been a mechanism of conflict, injustice, and secularizing colonialism in Canada? And so this has become a real challenge now, the data would suggest, for Canadians in Vancouver sharing their faith. Even throughout the scope of the research, as I mentioned, new discoveries were made regarding the church's role in residential schools with unmarked graves. Noting this change in the position of the church in society, Canadian missiologist Sam Chase writes, "Something is very different in the current Canadian zeitgeist compared to the one 30 years ago. There is a growing rejection of Christianity. Christianity is not seen as having a positive influence in the Canadian mosaic. The question being asked today is not whether Christianity is true, but whether it is good for Canada and for being human. Increasingly, the answer is no." The missional church conversation has long acknowledged the impact of mission history on Christian witness in a post-Christendom landscape. As South African David Bosch noted, colonialism and mission, as a matter of course, were interdependent. The right to have colonies carried with it the duty to Christianize the colonized. In the Vancouver context, this legacy has become a significant challenge to the ongoing mission of the church in its attempt to reach out to those who have no church affiliation or background, and whose impression of Christianity is primarily informed through negative media reports of mission history. Here, the research clearly identifies in multiple Christian initiatives in our city both the awareness and the desire to engage in meaningful reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. This will not be a quick process, however, as Philip Sheldrake reminds us that reconciliation requires a complex balance between structural change and spiritual harmony, as well as being evolutionary, whereby, quote, long-term and deep reconciliation cannot be achieved without mutual repentance and the discovery of common ground. Next slide. The changing face of Christianity in Vancouver. I see Santa Ono, former president of UBC, and that I remember when he was standing right here lecturing a few years ago. Rooted in the familiar secularization thesis, many have assumed that Christianity is in steep decline in Vancouver, as many of those with European Christendom heritage have ended any formal association with organized religion, from regular church-going to rites of passage, such as Christian baptisms, weddings, or funerals. For these Vancouverites, when they or their parents moved to the west coast of Canada, they left behind whatever Christian faith they may have once practiced. Scholars such as Oliver Roy are blunter in their assessment of the current state of the secular West, as, quote, a common drawback today is that lay culture has forgotten its religious roots. This is not a result of anti-clericalism or a militant anti-religious stance. It is simply ignorance. This was clear in the fieldwork where many participants described their neighbors or co-workers' reaction to Christian faith simply in terms of apathy. One respondent said in a follow-up email after the focus group, "Most people I know say, oh, you go to church? I don't know, I think maybe my grandparents did that. That's cool. And they tell me then that they're off to cycle Stanley Park on Sunday or go skiing up Grouse without any interest or sense that my Christian faith might have something important to offer their lives." Now, here we see evidence of Hugh MacLeod's observation that the decline of Christendom has meant that Christianity has been gradually losing its status as kind of a common language and has tended to become a local language used by those who are professing Christians. It's an interesting argument. This was summarized in a focus group participant's comment, quote, most Vancouverites do not really understand what Christianity is really about and why we do what we do for Jesus. It isn't a judgmental approach. Rather, it's more apathetic in that classic Vancouver you-do-you approach to life. But the research also suggests that there is another story to be told. As Claire Dwyer observed, the city of Vancouver may be a less well-known example of a global city, but it is characteristic of a range of emerging global cities, particularly orientated towards Asian transnational circuits of capital and migration. In building an urban missiology of Vancouver, missiologists moving forward would do well to look the other direction, to Asia rather than Europe, as the Christian community in Vancouver today is increasingly marked by the presence of Asian believers, rather than those with European heritage. In a number of the field sites and focus groups engaged, there appears to be much vibrancy in the ethnic-specific congregations, in large pan-Asian multi-site churches, a growing Asian Christian presence in established churches, and in the Roman Catholic Archdiocese, with profound immigration also impacting the Orthodox Church, the Armenian Orthodox Church in the city. The focus group discussions offered evidence that Vancouver Christians from a non-European heritage felt they had an advantage in sharing the gospel with their non-Christian neighbors, including Indigenous peoples. Many of those interviewed identify that they moved to Vancouver from places where Christianity is a minority or even a persecuted expression, and describe this as an advantage in engaging in Christian witness and mission. Canadian sociologists of religion like Joel Thiessen are beginning to take note of this shift when he writes, "Truth be told, levels of individualized secularization would likely be worse if it were not for immigration. Immigration keeps Christian identification, belief, and practice afloat, notably in Roman Catholic and conservative Protestant settings." So, the research, I think, has problematized the assumption that the church in Vancouver is in clear and seemingly inevitable decline. I raise the question instead of whether the church in Vancouver is perhaps changing alongside the traditional narratives of the church declining or disappearing. Indeed, by attending to God's presence in those places that fly under the radar, including ethnic-specific churches, or the growing numbers of Asian believers in all churches in Vancouver, will be important for further study. Here we note the prophetic description of mission by the late Cascadian-born Chicago-based urban missiologist Ray Backey, who some of you in the room knew. Mission is no longer about crossing the oceans, jungles, and deserts, but about crossing the streets of the world's cities. From now on, nearly all ministry will be cross-cultural amid the urban pluralism caused by the greatest migration in human history. And so we'll move on to the next category, which is fascinating to me, scarce sacred space. That's a real site. It's on Facebook. You can check it out, churchforsale.ca. A significant finding in this study is that a particular challenge for Christian communities in Vancouver is in connection with finding and maintaining ecclesiastical meeting and service space. Given that Vancouver is home to some of the most expensive real estate in the world, the fieldwork highlighted the dilemma of faithful stewardship of property for those churches who are fortunate to have buildings, and the ongoing challenge of immigrant churches and church plants who are new to the city and cannot find a place to gather for worship and service. As church planter Kevin Malkin noted of Canada's largest cities, quote, "The Canadian Broadcasting Company has said that Canada is on track to close over 9,000 sacred buildings in the next decade, roughly 1/3 of all our religious spaces." He's Ontario-based in Hamilton. In what Philip Sheldrake calls sacramentality, a material sign of God's action in human lives, the question remains about the visibility of the Christian community, at least in the form of ecclesiastical buildings, when one of the major challenges to life in Vancouver is affordability. While medieval cathedrals are considered texts in the broadest sense implied by what we mean by that word, what to do, we say, about the Christian witness of architecturally unremarkable post-war ecclesiastical edifices now either in need of repair or redevelopment? Are these older, often poorly maintained buildings seen by the broader secular community as a witness, or simply as a development opportunity? David Garben and Anna Strawn muse about what the impact might be of urban restrictions on religious communities when they write, "Struggles over the meaning and use of everyday urban space are of major significance in reaffirming or contesting the dominant production of space. While apart from a few notable exceptions, the question of religious and sacred space has generally been absent from recent literature on urban social movements. This is certainly true in Vancouver, where the issue of diminishing sacred space has not been widely addressed in the media or academy. In recent years, both denominational efforts at redevelopment, such as the United Church of Canada's new real estate body, and ecumenical organizations such as Trinity Centers Foundation have been formed, trying to figure out what to do with these church spaces before they are lost forever. And of course, this concern regarding the decline of sacred space in Vancouver is not one that we should necessarily assume alarms the general, more secular public. Maybe it's just us that are anxious about this. Nor should we assume it troubles civic politicians who would often prefer to rezone a religious assembly space that currently brings in zero property tax to City Hall due to Christendom-era exemptions, and instead create zoning to provide for-profit taxable housing or commercial space. As Canadian sociologist Joel Thiessen notes, the demand for religion is not as strong in Canada as once thought, and that no matter how relevant the preaching, lively the music, effective the programming, or caring an environment offered, the data from his work determined that the reasons for diminished involvement and the potential reasons for greater involvement are largely beyond what religious groups can control. And so this becomes a challenge for us now. What do we do with these older buildings, and how do they hold a presence in our community? We'll go to the next slide. Definitely something that came up was the connection between ecology and theology. We love showing obnoxiously beautiful pictures in Vancouver, don't we? The one on the far left I took from the ferry coming from Bowen Island a couple of days ago. As noted throughout the study, Vancouverites place a high social value on both the care for the physical environment as well as enjoyment of the same. Some commentators on religion in the city, such as our own Vancouver Sun newspaper columnist Douglas Todd, have even gone as far as to call environmentalism Vancouver's commonly held civic religion, or what Philip Sheldrake calls the soul of the city. From Vancouver as the birthplace of the environmental activist organization Greenpeace, to the stunning beauty of oceans and mountains, captured by the tourist board's slogan Super, Natural, British Columbia, to the limitless outdoor recreation opportunities, this research demonstrates that Vancouver's engagement with the environment is something that Christians must take seriously when considering mission in the city. Focus groups in the study explore questions of how Vancouverites' reverence for the environment could present both challenge and opportunity for sharing their faith. One participant observed, "Our way forward is to have a missional theology embraced by all churches in Vancouver that is incarnational and holistic in its understanding of the gospel. If that could seep into the church across Vancouver, then we would see creation care and Indigenous culture more naturally addressed and embraced." Following up on this understanding of incarnational and holistic, the participant noted that too often Christianity is seen as something that takes place within a building, rather than connecting with God and others in the beauty of creation. Reflecting on what that means for connecting missionally with others, another participant said, "So our goal is the same with non-Christians, and here is where our commonality comes from. The opportunity to both share the gospel and ask, where does your hope for this world come from?" They may or may not have an origin story of why they care about the environment, but it is a shared value and an opportunity for us as Christians to share faith. Creation care was highlighted by many of the groups that I interviewed with that kind of overlapping consensus and a Charles Taylor kind of sense of where we meet the other. Philip Sheldrake names ecology as one of the key values of the good city, noting that is to say, the good city minimizes the ecological footprint, balances nature with the built environment, and encourages efficient building. The research demonstrated, however, that for Christians living in Vancouver, this attention to creation care meant more than being a good citizen and recycling when possible. No, it was a reminder that Christians have a rich and storied engagement through a theology of creation, and that our Christian communities can be places where this love of God's world is made known, from leafy green neighborhoods to the hardscrabble reality of the downtown east side. being able to articulate and embody a different understanding of the world around them as creation rather than nature became an essential witness for Vancouver Christians that were interviewed and provide both a corrective as well as a bridge for partnership with their more secular neighbors. What is clear from the research is that Vancouver Christians are both aware of the high value that their non-Christian and likely secular neighbors place on the environment, as well as mindful of their opportunity to articulate this theology of creation. And so to engage in mission in Vancouver today without this sensitivity to the environment, it would be tricky. Missiologist Stefan Paas notes this importance of attending to environmental issues for urban Christians in the West by asking, and how could churches evangelize credibly in their secular post-Christian city without being involved in justice and environmental issues? Seeking this overlapping consensus with non-Christian neighbors and care for the planet remains a viable mission option and approach for Christians in Vancouver. As Paul Williams of Regent College writes, the hopes of the environmental movement for conservatism, sustainable living, and democratic participation are hopes that Christians can affirm enthusiastically. Therefore, with these 7 significant observations emerging from the research into Christianity in Vancouver, we're now ready to turn to our final step and tentatively offer proposals for the wider question of urban witness through a missiological lens in North America. If you're getting antsy, this is like where the pilot, you can feel the wheels coming out and the plane starts to, we're somewhere over Hope heading for YVR, friends. Here we go. So here are 4 outcomes from the research. Mission through relationships, mission through creation care, mission through walking worthily, I'll explain that in a minute, mission through the church that God is bringing. As we near the end of the lecture, we turn now to the larger curiosity about what God is up to in Vancouver. As a missiologist, the question that drives my research is literally, what in the world is God up to? Literally, that question. So in light of this data, let's have a look at a few different sections. That's great. Yep, mission through relationships. The research offers consistent and clear evidence that Christians in Vancouver are placing a high value on the building of relationships with their non-Christian neighbors in order to share and show the gospel. To be clear, this is not part of a wider evangelistic program. It even creeps me out to say the friendship evangelism, some of us remember those days, just creepy, no, which tends to treat one's neighbor as an object, right, rather than subject. That was not at all in the data. No, there was clear evidence that Christians both recognized the deep isolation and loneliness in their neighbors, as well as the gospel's call to love their neighbor as a way of engaging in witness. Christian leaders in Vancouver would be wise to note that traditional evangelistic techniques, such as revivalist gatherings and street preaching, did not resonate with Christians, at least in this research. Instead, what became clear over time from studying the data is that Christian initiatives in Vancouver need to build deep relational connections with their non-Christian neighbors in order to create space over time to share and show the gospel. Christian witness detached from relationship appears to be ineffective and unhelpful in the highly secularized and diverse Vancouver context. Set within the theological framework of exile, this outcome of mission through relationships resonates with Jeremiah 29:7. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. This commitment by Vancouver Christians to build deep and meaningful relationships with their non-Christian neighbors is rooted in an outward turning of the church to the city and its inhabitants in order to seek and increase God's shalom for all. To be clear, this is not simply an act of Canadian niceness or politeness. Yet in the Canadian context, the wider culture does exert some pressure against more public prophetic action for Christians. Those participating in the research were able to connect their engagement of non-Christian neighbors without traditional proselytizing, with a deep desire both to love their neighbor and to discern opportunities to share and show their Christian faith. If there's a biblical verse beyond the exile narrative to connect with this first outcome, it might be 1 Peter 3:15. But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is inside you. Do this with gentleness and respect. A challenge and an opportunity emerging from this first outcome for Christian leaders in Vancouver is to ask, how are we as a church equipping our members for their relational engagement with non-Christians when they are not gathered on Sunday morning? Second outcome, mission through creation care. Throughout the research, a shared value identified in both the Christian community and the wider Vancouver context was that of environmentalism, as you heard me say earlier. And given Vancouver's international reputation for natural beauty, proximity to the Pacific Ocean, old-growth rainforest on the North Shore Mountains, it just sounds lovely, doesn't it? Those intending to lead Christian communities in the city must recognize the missional implications of sharing the gospel in a place where environmentalism is the civic religion. Christian initiatives in this project espouse viewpoints and name practices that reflected a commitment to care for creation, including things like community gardens at churches and so forth. Now, in other words, it was not apparent that Christians were engaging their commitment to creation care in order to simply proclaim the gospel. Instead, Christian initiatives in the research articulated a sincere and deeply held theological value, reflecting the biblical mandate for stewardship of creation, that also offered overlapping consensus with their non-Christian neighbors, holding values of what Paul Bramadat so beautifully coined in that recent publication, reverential naturalism. Reverential naturalism. Residential, practice-based Christian communities in Vancouver, such as Arosha or Christian outdoor camps, were often named by focus group participants as ideal examples of how Christians should be caring for the planet. Christian leaders in Vancouver would be wise to carefully attend to the shared value of environmentalism between their congregants and non-Christian neighbors as an opportunity to work together to build the common welfare of the city. Here too we see a link with the theological framework of exile, as in Jeremiah 29 says, build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce. For those in exile, they are to engage the natural surroundings in which God has placed them, including the tending and care of the planet. For Christians in a post-Christian context like Vancouver, a missional embrace of God, neighbor, and creation can properly be understood as a doxological act of Christian praise and practice. Again, one of my favorite missiologists, Stefan Pass, notes, quote, if mission is about God being glorified in all his creation, nothing can remain untouched. Encouraging Christians to have a more holistic understanding of mission, where joining our neighbors in care for the planet is seen as an act of glorifying God as much as worship in a sanctuary. The next one, mission through walking worthily. Who can identify the picture on the right? Where is that? Grouse grind, well done. The 3/4 mark, you never seem to get there. It's always further than you think. For those looking for insights from the research on how best to engage in Christian mission in Vancouver, an outcome suggested by this study is the need to attend to the holistic impact of the Christian community through what the Bible calls walking worthily. Christians in this study clearly articulated their awareness of the negative aspects of the church's colonial mission activities, as well as the need to engage in a humble, peace-seeking way of witness in the world that strives for reconciliation with all people. The growing awareness in the broader public, including through the media, of the church's participation in the government-mandated cultural genocide against Indigenous peoples in the 19th and 20th centuries through the residential schools program must be accounted for in order to engage in mission today. As a result, Christians in this Vancouver study could be described in the language of being reflexive. They were self-aware. And there's this sense in which they were aware of not only their actions, but the legacy of the Christian label that they were carrying. As messengers of the gospel of peace and reconciliation, Christians in Vancouver acknowledge that God is calling them to walk worthily of the message they carry. Here, Christian pastors would be wise to model and equip their members for a holistic approach to witness, described by missiologist Daryl Guter as be, do, and say witness. Being our character, doing our action, saying the language that we use to convey meaning. This invitation for Christians to approach the other with humility and grace through attention to their character, action, and speech will be essential. The integrity of the gospel is questioned now in the broader Vancouver public due to the previous character, actions, and words used by Christians on the West Coast. This new reality, where the church is declining in power while other groups are increasing in prominence and influence, creates an urgency in the way in which Christians conduct themselves in the city. The biblical call to walk worthily is one that Christian communities in Vancouver must attend to in the way worship, small groups, service, and fellowship are utilized to help shape Christian character in the broader, more secular context of the city. Urban missiologists like David Fitch, Canadian-born, now based in Chicago, have been advocating for this kind of holistic formation for a long time. While Christians may feel marginalized or forgotten in Vancouver, surrounded by a more secular culture, here too we see connections with the theme of exile. For the Jewish people in Babylon, they were also feeling isolated and surrounded by those who did not wish them well. However, Jeremiah's prophetic pronouncement of God's presence and purpose for them in exile gave the people hope. Jeremiah 29 again, verse 11, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." So too, Christian communities in Vancouver can find their way forward as a minority voice with affection for the surrounding community rather than retreating from public life in fear. And the final outcome: mission through the future church that God is bringing. Finally, for those discerning through this research what God is up to in Vancouver and seeking guidance on how to respond in mission, it is important to note how the data identifies the way in which the face of Christianity is changing in the city. Sam Reimer and Michael Wilkinson conclude from their extensive research with over 500 pastors across Canada that, quote, "We see few reasons to think that any native-born Christian population will grow, including evangelicals. These numbers may stabilize depending on future immigration patterns and retention." It appears when reflecting on the data that while many churches with European roots are aging and declining numerically in Canada, on the other hand, Christian churches with immigrant populations are growing in notable numbers and influence. Paul Bramadat has raised the question, what is puzzling is the fact that the common and intimate relationship between Canadian Christianity and Canada's various ethnic communities has not yet received comprehensive treatment by scholars of Canadian religion or ethnicity. Bramadat notes that it often surprises people to learn how many of the visible minorities they might see in their cities, including many Chinese, South Asian, West Indian, African Canadians, are also Christians. More research will be needed to help identify and analyze the characteristics and challenges of these non-European ethnic expressions of Christianity in Canada. The other publication that John mentioned tonight, Christianity and Asian Religion in Vancouver, was one of our latest attempts from St. Andrew's Hall to address that question. Not all Christian communities, of course, will be able to make this change of welcoming newcomers. And for those who continue to climb in numbers and vitality, existing churches will have another way to make a significant sacrificial contribution to the church that God is bringing, through creative use of real estate. The research also identified the pressing issue of scarce sacred space, as we heard earlier, and so for congregations that currently own property but are experiencing decline, a challenge in the near future will be the decision of what to do with their building. Will their decision-making provide evidence of walking worthily as they take their final footsteps as a community of faith? Many churches have already sold their lucrative real estate to developers to build condos where communion tables once sat. Some of these have negotiated smaller worship spaces, while others have arranged for concessions of affordable housing in addition to for-profit housing. For the church that God is bringing, however, affordable public assembly spaces for church plants is already a significant challenge. How might established congregations in Vancouver, who are moving into a palliative stage, be able to imagine the stewardship of their property beyond the current default practice of contracting with a developer to replace church buildings with high-rise condos? Could these declining congregations offer a final witness to the gospel that proclaims death and resurrection by gifting their multi-million-dollar properties to other churches, mainly ethnic congregations and church plants growing and seeking space, in order to continue a witness not of their own, but one carried out by future generations not yet born? Here again we see connections with exile, where the people were encouraged to plan for a future they may not even live into. Jeremiah 29:6, marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in numbers there, do not decrease. The exiles were commanded by God to attend to the next generation and generations after by creating the conditions for life, even as they felt their own slipping away. For those leading Christian communities today in Vancouver, might they hear a similar summons from God to create space for Christian life to flourish for generations not yet born, who might hear, receive, and respond to the gospel call of discipleship? In conclusion, that is the most Canadian picture you could ever ask for right there. Capilano Suspension Bridge and Mounties, you're welcome. Throughout the research, participants, both church leaders and lay people, acknowledge the challenge of being Christian as a minority within the larger population in this modern secular West Coast city. My colleague and friend at the Center for Missional Leadership at St. Andrews Hall, Reverend Dr. Tim Dickow, summarizes this challenge when he writes, "Most church leaders I know feel as if the rug has been pulled out from underneath their ecclesiastical feet. Moreover, because belief has become optional and religion has been sidelined in the public space, the voice of the church has been effectively muted, making a life that is devoted to God seem irrelevant, if not ludicrous." Dickow continues, "Like the dark, dense, suffocating cloud cover that often hangs over Vancouver's Pacific coastline in the winter, the secularity Charles Taylor describes can cast gloom and doubt over long-standing followers of Christ. And yet, as this presentation draws to a close, I must also say how encouraged and impressed I was by the variety of thoughtful, innovative, and faithful people I met during this research, seeking the peace and prosperity of the city while continuing to offer a faithful witness, trusting so that they were doing so in partnership with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in their midst. By addressing the research question, I attempted to develop a thicker description of Christianity in Vancouver today, and by doing so witnessed many Christians quietly at work trying to make a faithful impact on their neighborhoods and the wider city. Noah Tolley in his work, this is an excellent piece of work, Cities of Tomorrow and the City to Come, observes that we ought to develop neighborhoods that signify and symbolize the reconciliation of God, humanity, and nature, and not only the estrangement between them. We must stretch and sacrifice and strive to live in ways that do not burden ecosystems, far-off communities, and future generations. In this research, I have seen concrete examples of how Vancouver Christians are addressing this call to action that Tolley demands. In building an urban missiology for Vancouver, now we can see a clearer vision of the motivating beliefs and spiritualities of Christian communities, along with the cultural and organizational performances of missional engagement those communities exercise within our city. The research serves, I believe, as an example of Christianity's minority report within a larger, more secular culture that bears little evidence of a Christendom legacy. Therefore, while Vancouver does remain a natural place for most residents, with its soaring mountains, old-growth forest, and ocean waves, for those who claim their identity in baptismal waters with Jesus, this city remains both a place of God's revelation and a context for God's ongoing mission in a world in need as ever of reconciliation, hope, and peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lockhart. It was just wonderful. I have a feeling there might be some questions. There might be some comments. I have a microphone here, and I am happy to wander the hall and bring it to you. I'd only ask, I think there's going to be a lot, so I only ask that fairly succinct questions, effusive praise for Ross, of course, can be joined with that. But please, your questions.
Thank you very much for that question. I just mentioned at the end Paul Bramadot's new phrase that he's coined. You know, it's always good as an academic when you coin a phrase, you can retire on it. But his summary that when you say spirituality in the Pacific Northwest, what actually people mean is reverential naturalism, I find helpful. So it is individualistic. It is not primarily communal, which I didn't even get into tonight. We could have got into the Vancouver Foundation's excellent multiple reports on isolation in the city. So there's that shadow side, obviously, of individualism, but primarily what the research, not just my own but others, would be suggesting is that when you have an affable agnostic neighbor who says that they're spiritual, what they will hold and value is that reverential naturalism. They have a deep sense of awe and wonder and mystery and reverence for the created world, what we would call the created world, but they would not locate that within doctrinal assumptions of a theology of creation, if that makes sense. It's a good question. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank
A
you.
follow-up question to that, which is, if you can get as much transcendence, well, let me rephrase that. If you can get a transcendence from going to the beach and watching the sunset anywhere in Vancouver, why bother going into a building for another experience of transcendence?
Right.
So what do you think, in your research, what is the right language to use in taking someone from reverential naturalism to there's something else there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was afraid you were going to mention Wreck Beach for a moment there, but that's a whole other kind of worship. So that was consistently a frustration that was named in the focus groups. So I won't be glib and try and offer kind of off-the-cuff response. I think where I found in the research that people were finding deeper connection was, Father's earlier question here was around individualism versus communal belonging. So there was that sense in which time and time again people would say that when my friends could see the deep relationships that are formed through our Christian community, some but not all would say, oh, I would like that too. I mean, to go back to the Vancouver Foundation report, and if you haven't read it, it's well worth looking at. Thousands of Vancouverites interviewed hundreds of Christian agencies and leaders. They had simple questions like, if you're going away for the weekend or for the week, which neighbor would you ask to take in your mail? And like an overwhelming number of Vancouverites say, I don't have anyone. I live in a high-rise condo. I don't know anyone. So that deep sense of isolation is a real challenge. So my hunch would be, when reflecting on the data, that a small number would find their way into Christian community out of a sense of a need for belonging, but that it's pretty highly resistant in the broader culture, in the you do you kind of culture. I wish I had a better response. When you figure it out, let me know, and churches will be booming. Great question, thank you. Hi, Rob.
I've got a whole list of questions here, but I'll restrict
Fantastic.
myself to just one, and maybe I'll take you for a beer somewhere in the next
Yes,
month, and we can talk about it.
I'm always up for
yeah.
that, sir.
Just to follow up on that, really, this is one that relates. You talk about the scarcity of sacred space, but most of the sacred space in Vancouver is locked during the week, and so those who may be wandering past and have a chance to access it actually can't, and the only people who access the sacred space are those who are already committed believers, committed to going on a Sunday morning or whenever it happens to be open.
Yes.
I wonder if there's something about being missional in opening the buildings, even when sometimes that might be at some risk.
Yeah.
Or is that just, has that boat sailed? What's your feeling on that?
No, I would say amen to that. I had a beautiful interview with a congregational leader. It was when pandemic restrictions eased a little, and in the walking interview, she described, well, the building was closed down. She was in the building preparing for online worship, and they had a stained glass picture of Jesus facing out. And no one was allowed in the building at that time of the pandemic. And there was a woman not in her congregation who kind of scared her because she walked by, she didn't realize she was there. And she was standing outside the Lockhart church during COVID worshiping Jesus. And it led this pastor to reflect on the importance of ecclesiastical space as witness. I butchered it a little bit, but I had a piece in there more about the problem is, and I'm going to offend someone, But the West Coast has terrible ecclesiastical space. Like whenever I'm back in Toronto or Montreal, man, those are church buildings. You know, like they are texts in that semiotic way, right? They literally convey, where, you know, most of our church buildings look like 1950s hydro substation buildings. Like they're just really not beautiful spaces. So that's why I had that little piece about, we think we're actually conveying a message with our buildings, but are we? I don't know. And then there's enough of us who have been congregational ministers over the years, as you have, Rob, in the Church of England and now here in Canada, who are a little uncertain whether hosting the Girl Guides, Scouts, and Brownies year after year is actually leading people to Jesus, or it's just cheap space, right? So that's the dilemma, right? Is how do you be a good neighbor and have that continued outreach to share the gospel? You have many questions. We'll get around to some maybe after. Good. That's great. So, I mean, there are any number of options, and one is kind of a fear-based, where you see anything outside the stained glass windows as dark and foreboding and that kind of thing. I mean, I'm a cheerful enough Reformed Christian to believe in God's revelation in any number of places, and so I think to see the community always as a place of potential revelation is important. It is an adjustment to no longer think of ourselves as majority culture. And, you know, growing up in Winnipeg, when I did, most people had some religious connection. Half of them were Mennonite, but, you know, it's Winnipeg. And so it is a very different space now. And I think we have lessons to learn from other religious minorities. I remember when I was pastor on the North Shore, and we got an invitation for our daughter's friend's birthday party in grade 2, and it was Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. And the kid's name was Faith, which I thought was lovely and ironic. And I was in fine form and fuming and showing this to my wife, and she said, yeah, but when was the last time we stopped to ask on a Saturday birthday invitation if our child's friend was Jewish, right? So we have these certain cultural assumptions. I think adult converts that are more and more the case in our church are helping us understand that, as well as those who immigrate from places. We have a lot of Indonesian students at Vancouver School of Theology, most of whom are Reformed, and they're very helpful at speaking about how to be a Christian witness from a minority perspective. But it does take work. I mean, when I work with congregations on retreats and so forth, one of the questions I'll ask is how many of you in the room were carried into church for the first time, and how many of you walked in for the first time? And that will give you some sense of the community. And so the number who are carried into church for the first time, that's rapidly declining. And so churches that are attending to creating space of hospitality, welcome, and catechetical instruction, almost like the rite process in the Roman Catholic tradition, I mean, that becomes even more important, I think, moving forward, because the culture no longer conveys even a distorted notion of the Christian gospel. Thank you. It's really helpful as always, Paul. Thank you. In the book that I co-authored with Jason Biasi, Better Than Brunch, that was shown earlier, we have a chapter on missional metrics, and that was a study of Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver. And we do raise the question about how do we value our Christian ministries, and buildings traditionally have been part of that, but we use threefold nickels, noses, and renown, right? So you know that you're doing well if there's money coming in, if there's people there, and if you're known for something, right? And that has shifted significantly now, and I don't think we need to get rid of those metrics, but I think we can tweak them, right? So the nickels becomes now, how are you not just investing and preserving your own Christian enterprise, but in the welfare of the neighborhood? And the noses is less about, are the important people in the community here? That's still a test for me when I guest preach, when an elder or a minister, when I'm visiting, goes out of their way to point out to me who the important people are. Third row over, that's a retired judge. Why do I care? Do they love Jesus? Like, why do I need to know that? Who cares? So do you have a good mix of the neighborhood in the community. When I guest preach at a church, I'll try and show up early, go to a coffee shop, and take a mental snapshot of who's in that coffee shop, and they go one street over into the church, and I take another shot, and I ask, are these two alike, right? And then Renown, what are you known for? I've done consulting for churches, and they'll say things like, they'll tell me as a missiologist, oh, we're well known in this community for our fabulous choir. And then I'll go and do streeter interviews, and I'll report back to them, actually, you're known for your flea market. Sorry, folks, that's what you're known for, right? I'm usually not invited back to those churches, but how do we work on what we're known for? So if our beautiful buildings were what we are known for, is that really connected to the gospel? It's a challenge. Thanks, Paul. Everyone has deeply held morals and values and beliefs, whether they self-identify as Christian or not. At least I believe that. And so, yeah, there are multiple points you made there. I think the shift from individualism to communal, that is important. Often ethnic-specific congregations have a deeper sense. But the challenge then becomes what happens in the 1.5 and 2.0 generation. Like, my family is Northern Irish immigrants in Winnipeg. We were tight. And when I go back to Winnipeg now, almost all of my family are dispersed somewhere else. We hardly ever get together all together except for funerals, right? And so what happens in the 1.5, 2.0 generation for Asian believers, that's a question that's being raised. But you're right around the communal. In the other book that's been published recently, we interviewed a member of the St. Andrews Hall board, Dr. Victor Ling, who's a cancer researcher here at UBC, and he was saying when one of his relatives was dispatched from China to go to Australia, we were interviewing him, and he said, well, why did he choose to go to Australia? And he said, oh, you don't understand Chinese culture. He didn't choose. The elders of the village said, you will go to Australia, make money, and send it back to us. Like, he said, you're too Western in your thinking, right? So, I mean, I think there will absolutely be some knock-on there. The question is, at what point does the Western culture start to overwhelm? That's an ongoing question. Great. It's a huge question. I also want to acknowledge there's pain behind that question that's shared by many, many people about shared values that are not passed on from one generation to the other. There was a certain cultural, community, catechetical action when faith was passed generation to generation, and that has really broken down. I think part of the challenge, it's a challenge anywhere across Canada. The Pacific Northwest, Cascadia as we call it, is particularly a challenge. It's not edgy. It used to be edgy to declare oneself as non-religious. Now it's commonplace. It's actually kind of edgy to declare yourself Christian or Muslim or Jewish or Buddhist and so forth. And so that becomes a challenge. I mean, there's some that would joke that the snow in the Rocky Mountains is actually people's ripped up baptismal certificates as they passed over. And part of the individualism, there's been some really good work done on this, is that folks like, I commend Lynn Marks, who is a historian at the University of Victoria. She's done good work called Infidels and the Damned Churches, Religion and Irreligion in Settler British Columbia, UBC Press. And she makes the argument that Christendom was never fully established on the West Coast because this was an extract economy. Young men primarily came here to make their fortune in mining, in forestry, and so forth, to get rich, to get out, and to go somewhere else. And today it's real estate and IT and Hollywood North and whatever. No one stays forever kind of thing. Some people do. And so that's a condition of faith that's particularly challenging, right? How do you form multi-generational commitments when people in Vancouver are sometimes on the third or fourth generation raised without religion? And you may have raised your children in the Catholic faith, but the chances of them marrying and starting a family with someone is lower here than other places. So it's a real challenge. I would say there was evidence of that there was the greatest evidence of non-relational evangelism in those ethnic-specific congregations. I remember one focus group, a delightful woman said, asked the question around how you share the gospel with others or whatever, and she said, oh, well, I keep tracts on my kitchen table, and whenever I have someone come over to mow the lawn or whatever, I go out and I share a tract with them. And I part of me thought, I wonder how many different companies she's had to contract with in Vancouver to get someone to cut her grass. I mean, it's lovely. It's a lovely intention, but there was just no hesitation in speaking faith publicly. And there's also, and less, mainline Protestants are the worst for this. There was a sense of urgency that is often lacking in mainline Protestant churches, right? That this is important, this is compelling, this needs to be done. The ethnic-specific churches showed more, well, they had a more conservative theology. Well, that's always a difficult thing to describe, but yeah, we'll go with that language for now. Their kind of shadow side was the open door out the back end for the 1.5 and 2.0 generation. I had one pastor delightfully refer to the rules of engagement of the English ministry, because a lot of these ethnic-specific churches will put an emphasis on the English ministry. And this pastor said, look, you need to understand that even though there's an English ministry and the elders say this is the future, you need to keep our young people, this is still, his language was, this is Grandpa's house. And don't mess up Grandpa's house, right? So the power structure was very clear, which then, where do folks go from those churches? As a researcher, I'd use the kind of language of Pan-Asian, the 10th tapestry churches. So if you grow up Chinese Baptist and you marry a Korean Presbyterian, you don't want to go to the church that you grew up with. So you find a church that has a sufficiently evangelical feel to it your parents will be happy with, but you start in a new place. And now often what's happening from some of the research is the parents are following them there to those congregations. So there's still flux and change, but there certainly is a more kind of conservative perspective, and also a perspective that would see the outside world as not friendly to the Christian message, and one that needs to be rebuffed at times. I mean, Stefan Passo, I've quoted a few times, one of my favorite missiologists. He has a kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of describing the worst of that kind of church culture, and that is, he would say, where everything outside the church is a black canvas on which Satan paints. How's that for an image, right? He always says it with a little wry smile, but that feeling when you're in a space where, so you think everything out there is bad. There were at times elements of that, but at the same time there was a lot of generosity, especially around understanding what it means to live as a minority in a culture and so forth. Good, thanks. Thank you so much. Reminds me of a wonderful former permanent diaconate student whose spouse is an Air Canada flight attendant, and I was flying to Ottawa recently, and she came down the aisle, pulled down her mask, and said, Dr. Lockhart, so great to see you. And she just started sharing how much she loves her Catholic parish. And the first thing I thought is, you're going to get fired, right? Talking that openly about Christian faith. And so, yeah, there is that. I would say in the research that the focus groups in particular would be the most kind of transparent. Pastors, priests, not so much. They might say, it's not a friendly culture and that kind of thing, but they make their living off Christian words. So they have a high familiarity with speaking Christian faith, where a lot of people would say, look, I work at the Royal Bank or whatever, and I find it really difficult. I don't think this is actually like a safe space for me to speak my faith. And there were times where people would say, but colleagues who are of another world religion feel more free to express their faith. So that certainly was in the data. Whether it's true or impression, it's true to them. And I think that's where some of the findings around care for creation, respect for indigenous culture, will be a helpful way forward. I mean, my dear colleague, who I miss very much because he's away on sabbatical, Ray Aldred at Vancouver School of Theology, would be the first to say, well, like statistically, the number of Indigenous Canadians who self-identify as Christian is higher than the broader population. And he says that as a Treaty 8 Cree Northern Albertan. And so an example around the creche would be when I was a North Shore pastor, worked with a number of local churches, including the Roman Catholic churches, to help establish the festival down in Dunderave, where you have the trees and all the businesses decorate a tree and that kind of thing. And when you go, there is a full-on carved nativity scene that I thought, what? How did this get here? But it was carved by a Squamish elder. So who's going to take that away? No one's touching that, right? And so, like, I just think, isn't that interesting how witness happens when we see a brick wall and God just kind of works around it. But I don't want to diminish the importance of your question. I think that you even covered up when you did like the straitjacketing. I think that came through very clearly in the research, that people were struggling with how to articulate their faith in ways that wouldn't bring reproach, or at times it was almost like the apathy hurt more, right? There's just kind of the whatever, man, like I'm gonna go climb the Chief in Squamish or cycle Stanley Park. I think my grandparents did that thing like generations ago. That sense of, wow, like there is just no sense of value to what is core. That's something that Christians, I think, are working out in this society. Great question, thank you. I heard the word refreshments. I'm encouraged.
Yes, be encouraged. I think this is a really encouraging talk for all of the negativity that might be out there. I think you bring a great deal of hope and joy in the gospel and the church and in your love of Jesus and your love of humanity. So thank you, Ross, for that. And I want to let you know that this kind of event doesn't take place without a lot of help. And today I'd like you to thank, when we go get some refreshments, our wonderful students. One of the ways that we do mission here is we have a college and we have students. So Simranjeet, Caitlin, Quentin, Sam, Charlie are all here helping. So will you say hello to them when you get in there and thank them for their work this evening? But first and foremost, we have to thank you for your wonderful talk. Thank you so much, Ross. And please, one more round of applause.